What's going on, guys? It's Jack with Jack Banks MMA, and today we're looking at early betting ideas for UFC Fight Night, Kattar versus Allen. Let's go. Okay, so let's kick it off right away with the main event. I gotta be honest with you guys, it's a bit of a weird card. At least to me. I'm sure other people have better angles on this card. There's only a few fights that I really confidently can recommend to you guys in terms of value. And we're going to start off with the main event because that's what I've been doing on these videos. So we have Calvin Kattar taking on Arnold Allen. Off the bat, this was a very difficult fight for me to cap. There's a few reasons for that. The first is that Arnold Allen is very talented. He's been improving year over year, but he doesn't fight very often, which makes it really difficult to assess where he is in comparison to a guy like Calvin Kattar, who does fight very often and fights some of the top, has fought really the top guys in the division. So with that being said, you have Allen, who's 6 years younger. Size-wise, I think they're pretty close, maybe an inch or two difference in terms of height and reach, but fairly similar. So it's a very close matchup. And to me, right off the bat, so I just gave Kattar the edge slightly because of the experience factor. I put him at minus 120 to Allen plus 100. Now, on the side here, there's another narrative that I think is going on, which is from the UFC London card. I thought there were a few prospects that looked really good going into that card, and then had the first UFC London card, and then had really good performances on that night. So the first was Jack Shore. Jack Shore was a prospect who was growing, had been doing better and better, and then he took on Timur Valiev and got I thought, a clear but close decision win. He comes back in his next fight and takes on Ricky Simón. To me, I thought it was an even fight in terms of odds, but then he ends up ballooning to like minus 150, minus 160 or something. And I should have took Simón at that point, but I didn't. I was too far in the Jack Shore camp. So I stayed with Shore. Simón obviously got the knockout. Next is Tom Aspinall. He got the key lock submission against Volkov, and then his next matchup, unfortunately, he had that knee injury against Curtis Blaydes, so he never really got to see how the fight would have turned out, but Blaydes gets the win. So, is this going to be, the third time where one of those top prospects from UFC London comes out in their next fight and picks up a loss? I'm not sure if you should really use all of that other stuff into this bet because they're completely separate, but it's just something that I was paying attention to in the aftermath of that UFC London card from March. So to me, there's one way I think to play this fight, and we're going to have to see where the odds come out, but I'm going to say fairly, not certainly, but I do think this fight doesn't go the distance. I think somebody's getting finished over the course of the 5 rounds here. As I said earlier, Allen does not have a ton of experience. Obviously, the Dan Hooker win was good, but Dan Hooker didn't even look like Dan Hooker, and he hasn't been in a good run of form as of late. The drop down to featherweight just didn't seem wise at the time, and certainly in hindsight. So, in terms of alternate rounds, going up to fight goes the distance, I should say. I think over 1.5 is easy. 80% of the time, minus 400. And then I think you just take off 10% each round, right? So over 2.5, minus 233, 70% of the time. Over 3.5, 60%. Over 4.5, I think it's a toss-up, minus 110, really. And then fight goes to the scorecards, plus 120, somewhere in that range. So I think if you can get fight doesn't go to the decision at plus money, that's the way I'm going to look to play this fight. Just because I think, Allen doesn't have the experience of 5 rounds. If you go back and watch the Sadiq Youssef fight, while he is getting the the advice in his corner from Firas Zahabi in the third round. Kind of pitter patter, move along the outside, not really engage. Sadiq Youssef really took it to him in that third round, and this is an if, so take it for what it's will. But Allen had 2 big knockdowns in that fight. If he doesn't get those, Sadiq Youssef wins the fight. He's up on significant strikes. He has a more complete fight, but Allen has those 2 big moments. So I think what this fight comes down to is whether Allen will have those big moments against Kattar. And part of the reason I'm thinking maybe this doesn't go to the scorecards is Kattar's been in a ton of wars. A ton of them. I mean, forget the Max Holloway fight. Just look back at his last fight against Josh Emmett. That was a war. You get Chikadze fight, he put the damage on Chikadze, but still, it was a 5-round affair where he was taking some damage as well. He's getting up there in age. He took on Sabit a few years ago. He's been in a lot of really hard fights, and I think maybe this is the time when the chin fails him. But at the same time, I'm not very confident in that, and I could see this being the fight where Kattar's experience plays to his advantage, and he gets a late finish. So I don't have a ton of confidence, I gotta admit, in this main event. I think it's a very good fight, and for that reason, maybe hard to bet. But if you guys have an angle, I'd love to hear it. Okay, so now I'm going to go into some of the fights that I'm more confident in terms of how I feel about value and odds and all of that. And I'm going to leave out a large portion of this card. To be quite frank with you guys, I just don't have a good feel for some of the fights on this card. So off the top, at least for me, Dustin Jacoby taking on Khalil Roundtree. Now, I have to admit, I've bet Dustin Jacoby and won a bit of money on his run here at the light heavyweight division. With that being said, I think this might be where the run ends. Khalil Roundtree has looked like a completely different fighter his last 2 fights. Now I know, you're going to tell me it's against Modestas Bukauskas, Carl Roberson, and I agree. It's not the best set of competition. But Khalil Roundtree has come into these fights with an aggression, with quite frankly a mean streak to him that really was very inconsistent in his earlier fights. And I think that changes things a lot with this fight with Dustin Jacoby, because we've seen Jacoby struggle with aggression in the Kutalaba fight, in a bit with the power in the Maxime Grishin fight. I think Roundtree has both. And I think for that reason, I think Roundtree should be the favorite in this fight. Not a big favorite, but I think Roundtree has more of a chance to get a finish. Jacoby certainly is coming off the finish against Da'un Jung, but I think Jacoby is more likely to win this fight via decision rather than finish. And for that reason, Roundtree minus 125 to Jacoby plus 100 or so makes sense to me. As right now, they've been coming down, but Jacoby started off as a minus 200 or so favorite, which I thought was crazy. So I did take a stab at Roundtree early, and I think I will continue to play him even as the odds drop on him, because I think there's just value there. In terms of a prop, again, going back to the fact that I think Roundtree is live for a finish here, if you can get him via knockout, we'll have to see once the props come out. But anywhere above plus 150, I think makes sense. I just think he's much more live to get a finish in this fight. Next up is Chase Hooper versus Steve Garcia. Chase Hooper, all right, first of all, guys, in his last fight against Felipe Colares, I waited all week to get the best line on Chase Hooper. The line was moving in Colares' favor the entire time. They started off as minus 110 apiece. And Colares ended up like minus 170, minus 175, and I was shocked. I just didn't understand it. I thought Hooper could come in improved based off of his age, and I thought Hooper would have the grappling advantage because of his length. And I think both of those things are true going into this fight. The only difference is now people know how much to value Hooper. So the only thing that I would give you guys caution with, as long as you can get it, under minus 250. If it goes above that, I think you're paying a bit too much for Hooper. Right now, he's about minus 210. So I have played him in a couple parlays early on with UFC 280 fight. I just think he's got the grappling advantage, and I think, in that Kattar fight, his striking looks so much better. The time he spent with Stephen Thompson is clearly paying off, and I could see him looking better with the striking in this fight as well. He's a bit bigger. Steve Garcia is a good striker, but I just think Hooper, he's going to get it to the mat, and he's going to have a tremendous grappling advantage. The Luis Pena fight for Steve Garcia gives Chase Hooper, I think, a great blueprint for what to do in this fight, and I think he gets a finish. I'm not sure if it's TKO or submission, because he does have a propensity for getting some TKOs via ground and pound when he gets guys in bad positions and tires them out with his grappling. So could be either or, but inside the distance, anything above plus 100, I think on Hooper makes sense. Next couple, I'm going to go a little bit rapid fire because I don't have as much confidence as opposed to the prior two picks. So Roman Dolidze taking on Phil Hawes. I think it's a very close matchup. If you just look at the fights that they had against Kyle Daukaus, the fight that Phil Hawes had with Kyle Daukaus was much closer, obviously, than the early finish for Roman Dolidze. Also, Phil Hawes has some real chin issues, and not only that, but he really struggles when he has to be the nail in fights. He's a really good hammer, but when he's the nail, things go downhill quickly. So I think Dolidze should be the favorite. I think he should be around a not a big favorite, but like minus 130 or so. Just because Dolidze hasn't proven it, over a number of fights that he deserves that status. But I do think in a fight against Phil Hawes where it's a little bit of a grappler versus grappler affair, as long as Dolidze's cardio issues are past him, which frankly we didn't get a chance to see in the Daukaus fight, I think he can get a win here. The last fight I want to give you guys is Christian Rodriguez taking on Garrett Armfield in a battle of guys who debuted at 145. Now they each get to take on each other at their true weight class at bantamweight at 135. It's an interesting fight because I think Christian Rodriguez is the more talented fighter. I think he's better. He's a better grappler than Garrett Armfield. But Armfield has taken on a better set of competition, so it's hard to necessarily say with a great degree of certainty that Rodriguez should be a big favorite. I do think he deserves to be a favorite. I think around minus 160, minus 170 makes sense on Rodriguez. If the line balloons a bit on him, I certainly understand taking a value play on Armfield here. So let me know what you guys think on these UFC Fight Night Kattar versus Allen early betting ideas. If you guys have any thoughts on some of the other fights in the card, Tresean Gore taking on Josh Frem, Cody Durden taking on Clayton Rodriguez, even Waldo taking on Jared Vanderaa, who I can't believe is still in the UFC. So there's some other fights that I think are worth taking a stab at here. So let me know in the comments below, what do you think about my betting ideas, and let me know some of yours. See you guys next week. Peace.